Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is J.M. Conway, and I work at the University of Chicago Graham School, which is home to the Writers Studio. The Writers Studio is a place for community and writing. Um, there are writers and instructors passionate about the written word. We teach classes, we host events, we have certificate programs, and the studio connects writers of all genres and ability levels in creative and effective writing. Today, we are so pleased that you have joined us for the Art of Adaptation for the Stage with Doug Post. I am going to turn over this presentation to him in just a few moments, but not after reading his very impressive bio. Doug Post plays, which include Bloodshot, Cynical Weathers, Drowning Sorrows, Earth, Sky, and Murder in Green Meadows, and musicals, which include God and Country, the real-life story of Johnny DeFacto, and The Wind in the Willows, have been produced in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Canada, England, Wales, Germany, Austria, Russia, China, and South Africa. He has also been commissioned to write screenplays for Warner Brothers and NBC, teleplays for WMAQ TV, and several radio adaptations of his scripts. On 3 occasions, he has been selected to develop his work at the O'Neill National Playwrights Conference and once at the O'Neill National Music Theater Conference. He has received the L. Arnold Weisberger Playwriting Award, the Midwestern Playwrights Festival Award, the Cunningham Commission Award, the Blue Ink Playwriting Award, and 3 Playwriting Fellowship Awards from the Illinois Arts Council, and has been nominated for 3 Jeff Awards and an Emmy Award. Mr. Post lives in Chicago, where he is a founding member of the Victory Gardens Playwrights Ensemble. He teaches playwriting and theater appreciation at the University of Chicago Graham School and serves on 3 committees for the Dramatists Guild of America. Please join me in welcoming Doug to today's session. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and allow you, Doug, to share your screen. And I can also give you, are you able to unmute yourself, Doug?
I am able to unmute myself, and that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Great. I'm hoping that you all can see this poor man's PowerPoint I've created. The Art of Adaptation for the Stage. There's a little bit of chatter going on, so even if the mute is not working for you, perhaps you can hold comments till the end. I think Conway will be monitoring that. Anyway, the subtitle of this is, with a few business precepts to keep in mind when undertaking such a task. Emphasis on a few because I am not an attorney. I want to emphasize that there is a difference between a new work and an adaptation that may feel self-evident, but to some people it's not. A new work, you are creating something from whole cloth. You are faced with the empty page, you're faced with the blank screen. With the adaptation, you are working from an existing source. And that source can be a novel, it can be an article or a series of articles. It can be another play if what you're doing with that play is something that's never been done before, or perhaps turning it into a musical. A lot of great musicals we know were originally plays. But the thing about this is, when you are adapting something to the stage, you are a servant of 2 masters. The one master is that source material, and you've got to be true to that, but you also need to be true to this new medium that you are moving that source material into. So in this case, that new medium is the theater. I am going to be talking about 7 such adaptations that I have done. over the years. I'm going to give each of them about 5 minutes, move through it pretty fast because I want to leave time at the end for your questions, try to have maybe 15 to 20 minutes for that. Some of these are musicals because I'm also a composer and a lyricist. Some are plays. Some I wrote on spec, and some were commissions. Many of them are published, and one is about to be produced and will actually be starting performances in 3 days' time. So the first one I wanted to talk about is The Wind in the Willows. This is a musical adaptation of the book by Kenneth Grahame, originally written in 1908 and first produced at the Organic Lab Theater here in Chicago in 1985. This particular facility where it was done was a 65-seat house on Clark Street near Belmont. It was a part of the Organic. They had a great main stage, and then this second stage. That company is now defunct. The space is now defunct. It's probably been turned into a live bait store or something of that nature. But it was a going concern in the time, and the Organic was kind enough to reach out to a number of itinerant companies around town. I happen to be a part of one of them, called the Chicago New Plays Festival Company, which was a playwrights collective. Before we get to 1985, I've got to back up 2 years and talk about the Free Shakespeare Company, which was then run by an actor-manager named Frank Farrell. He was the artistic director, but he was an actor-manager at heart. Wonderful, creative guy, great actor, great singer. He is still with us. I don't mean to talk about him like he's in the past tense, but I believe he's moved to New York. So he's not as much on my radar now as he used to be. He was going to produce a version of Toad of Toad Hall by A.A. Milne, who some of you may know from Winnie the Pooh. And this is Milne's own adaptation of The Wind in the Willows. And Frank knew me, knew my work, and asked me to come in and compose music to the 4 existing lyrics that Milne had created in the play. I probably thought about this for all of 2 minutes before I said yes. I'm sure there was little or no money involved at the time, but Frank was somebody I wanted to work with. I liked his company. I liked the aesthetic of his company. So I signed on, and what I found myself doing, I suppose this could fall under the title of overreach or restlessness. I ended up pitching Frank on a song that I would create music and lyrics for because I saw a spot for it. And he said, "We'll do it. We'll try to put it in." And then I wrote another one, and then I wrote another one. So suddenly a play with songs that was only supposed to have 4 songs now has 7. I've written an opening number. And Frank said to me one day, "You know, we have to remember this is not a full-fledged musical. It is, in fact, a play with songs. We love your songs, Doug, and we like you too. We don't mean to offend, but we want to take what you think is the opening number and move it to the end of the show so that after our tale ends, the company can gather and sing it aloud. And that way we can still hear the title song, The Wind in the Willows." And I said, "Good, let's try that." We did. The show worked very well. So much so that the company decided to revive it the following year. And it was a different director this time and completely different actors in a different space. But come 1985, it was clear they were not going to do it a third time. So I suspect I checked with them before I did anything because I didn't want to intrude or take on a task I shouldn't be taking on. They said, "No, we're not going to be doing it again. You can take your songs and do whatever you want." So I cut all of Milne's lyrics, I replaced them with my own, and I then created music and lyrics to 5 more songs, now taking what was a play with songs and turning it into a full-fledged musical. I wrote my own book, meaning I went back to Graham's book and pulled the passages that I wanted to use, and I incorporated what I'm calling new passages of story theater. Story theater was a technique that Paul Sills had developed with his improvisational company back in the late 60s. Paul Sills being the son of Viola Spolin. Many people consider her to be the godmother of the Chicago theater movement. And basically what it means is that you take narrative and you divide that narrative up among company members. So actors are sometimes narrating on behalf of other actors, or they're narrating their own segment of the show. And Frank had done that with Toad of Toad Hall. I'm not sure any of us went and asked Milne's estate if we could actually do this. We should have, but it happened. And I incorporated that idea into my new retelling and added, a few more parts of story theater. The score itself was very eclectic. There was a Tin Pan Alley song, a Gilbert and Sullivan Send Up, a spiritual, a punk rock song, and of course, a calypso number. And we did get this done at the Organic Lab Theater, again, this 65-seat house on Clark Street. We invested all the money we had, which believe me was not a lot, but I talked our artistic director into doing this, and the show, as it turns out, was a hit. So much so that we doubled our investment. My artistic director, who was also our producer, thought she was the smartest producer in town. I will tell you, I think the entire production, because we were pulling from the resources of the Organic Theater, they gave us their space, access to pieces of sets, lights, costumes. I think we put about $2,500 into it, which doesn't seem like a lot today, but remember, it was all we had. So we doubled our money. We walked away with $5,000. We ran for 4 weeks. Simultaneously, there was a musical version of The Wind in the Willows that happened on Broadway that cost $250,000. It only lasted 4 performances and lost everything. So we learned that our small way of doing it may have been the way to do it. I will say this show has now had 250 productions around the world. So when I say that I paused for about 2 minutes before I said yes to Frank Farrell back in 1983, I would now get rid of those 2 minutes and jump into it because it turned out to absolutely be the right thing to do. And one of the great lessons in my life in the power of saying yes. Moving on then, that was a successful story. Now I want to tell you an unsuccessful story. We can chalk this up to being young and stupid. I wanted to do a play, not a musical, but a straight version of Aldous Huxley's incredible book, Brave New World. And I wanted to do this reading on the Organic Theater main stage, and they gave me permission to do so. And I knew that I had to get the rights for this because they were controlled. I knew the book was not in the public domain. So I went to the publisher, Harper and Row. They put me in touch with Huxley's estate. Huxley's estate put me in touch with their representative. Their representative, after months and months, finally wrote me back. It was basically a form letter saying the rights are not available. And I wrote back and I said, well, can you tell me who has them? And there was no response. And of course, they were under no obligation to say anything to me. So it was a mystery to me if I was going to secure the stage rights, who I was going to talk to. Meanwhile, while all these letters are flying back and forth, I'm writing the play as if I'm actually going to be able to get the rights. And of course, I haven't gotten the rights, but I still want to hear it read aloud. So I secured this space at the Organic. I secured a date. I casted 15 people. I sent out postcards advertising the event. And it was then that I got a phone call from the Dramatic Publishing Company, who we had started to build up an affiliation with, we being the Chicago New Plays Festival people. And I remember they were very gentle about this, but they said, Doug, you cannot do this because we have the stage rights. So this was my roundabout way of finding out who actually had the stage rights. Yes. Now they were great about this. They were great and generous because they said, we will allow you to do the show for a single evening as a Reader's Theater presentation, but after that, you cannot do it again. So this is a cautionary table. I just want to say it's really important, get the rights up front. Otherwise, you are creating what I would call a recipe for sadness. The reading was well received, and I got some great comments from, especially from 3 people who attended: Jeff Perry, founding member of the Steppenwolf Theater Company, and 2 writers here in town, Nick Patrica and John Ostrander. And I remembered their notes and I remembered my notes to myself, but of course I could do nothing with this. Now see, it says, however, ... This means there may yet be a happy ending to this particular saga, because what I have since discovered is that Brave New World will come into the public domain, actually has come into the public domain in Canada. And it doesn't come into the public domain in the UK until 2034. It will come into the public domain in the States, January 1st, 2027. 3.5 years now doesn't seem that long to wait. So during the pandemic, when we were all locked up in solitary confinement, I went back to this work and I remembered what my friends Jeff and John and Nick had said to me. and I looked at my notes from 40 years ago, and I made it a better and stronger piece of theater because hopefully I'm a smarter playwright than I was way back then. I will tell you, I also wrote those three gentlemen, and I said, remember 40 years ago? I just want to say thank you, because now I am finally incorporating those notes you gave me over half a lifetime ago. So we will see what happens with Brave New World, but I am still glad I undertook this because I learned a lot. Moving right along, God and Country. All right, this is a rock opera I wrote based on Sophocles' Antigone, a play that was first produced in 441 BC. And my version, Sophocles' Antigone, was done then. Mine, of course, was not done until I was in residence at the Victory Gardens Theater in Chicago in 2002. And Victory Gardens had already produced 4 of my plays, but none of my musicals. And I had a very strong reaction, as I know we all did, to the terrorist attacks of 2011, 2001. We were in the process of our war on terror. We were in process of our Patriot Act. And I was trying to figure out how, as an artist, I could respond to this. So I went out to lunch with our esteemed artistic director, Dennis Zacek, and he knew I was going to pitch him on something. And he said, so Doug, what are you thinking about? And I said, well, I would like to take Sophocles' Antigone and turn it into a musical. I don't think I used the term rock opera then because I didn't want to scare him. I just said musical. And I fully expected that the next word out of his mouth would be check. But instead, he said, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm going to need something by the end of the month. So I went home and I started doing some real research because up until then, the only version of Antigone that I was familiar with was Jean Anouilh's Antigone, based on Sophocles, first produced in Vichy, France in 1944. So I had to go back and look at the source material. And what I discovered is that originally 3 male actors portrayed all 8 characters, with the chorus made up of elders from the community, because this was all that was permitted under the rules of the drama competition in Greece. And what I didn't know is that it was actually Sophocles who introduced the idea of the third actor. Up until then, there had only been 2 on stage, plus the chorus from the community. There were 8 characters, and this is how he divvied it up. The part of Creon was only played by 1 actor. The part of Antigone was played by 1 actor who also played Tiresias and the Messenger. And the part of Ismene was someone who also played the Sentry, Haman, and Eurydice. I decided to keep with that idea of 3 actors portraying 8 characters. And also in my research, this should have been something that I figured out a long time ago, I found that this is not only a political piece, but it's also a feminist piece. So I thought, well, if 3 guys can play men and women, why couldn't 3 women play all 8 characters? If I want to blend in terms of a choral sound, I could have 4 men behind them playing all the instruments, acting as a traditional vocal chorus, and beating out what we think of as the rock and roll band made up of keyboard, guitar, bass, and drums. So that's what we did. I remember coming up with something for Dennis. I think it was 5 songs by the end of the month. I sent him, I went into the studio, I recorded them, I put down all the music, I sang all the parts, I gave him a treatment of how this whole thing was going to work. I think it went in on a Monday, and on Thursday he called and said, I like it and we're going to do it. And we were off and running. That's how fast it happened. So I now had to go back and create 25 more songs because it was going to be a 90-minute piece with 30 musical numbers. Again, this was primarily a rock score, but there was a little variation from that. There was a blues number and some hip hop and some rap. I should say a white man's idea of hip hop and rap, but I had really talented musicians who made me sound great. What was memorable to me was the variety of reactions I received, because there were some older subscribers at Victory Gardens, by which I mean people who had been there since its birth, who didn't necessarily take kindly to this idea of an electric guitar being brought into their theater. But the people in their 20s and 30s got it. And I think those are the people I was writing for. So I'm very glad I took that on. Moving along to another musical, This one for very young people, The Kingdom of Grimm, based on 3 stories by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, AKA the Brothers Grimm. They started publishing these stories in 1812 and kept adding into them until I think the 12th printing in 1857. This was first produced by Chicago playwrights at the Merle Reskin Theater here in town, which is a facility that holds 800 seats. And what happened was there was such a thing as the Cunningham Commission Award, which used to be a cash prize given out to a Chicago playwright. The year I came along, they decided they were going to make me work for my money. So it was no longer just the Cunningham Award, it was this commissioning award for youth theater. We're going to pay you to write something, and if we like it, we'll produce it at the Merle Reskin as a part of our program, Chicago Playwrights. So these are some of the questions I asked of my producers. Can I write a musical? Yes. How many actors can I have? 12. How many musicians? 3. They wanted something recognizable in the title so that they could essentially market this to school groups. I had in my library the complete works of the Brothers Grimm. This had been given to my son by the late, great Sheldon Patinkin. I myself had never read it, but I thought there might be something there. And so I started reading this work. Let me tell you, it's not small. 900 pages and 210 stories. What was helpful was that I had this title in mind, The Kingdom of Grimm. And so I found myself looking for 3 specific elements. I wanted some magical creatures because I thought, you know, this is going to be a group kindergarten through 6th grade. So hopefully that will appeal to this particular audience. I wanted royalty because I thought maybe there's a way of telling this in a generational way so that the prince of one story becomes the king in the next story, and the princess of that story becomes the queen of the next story. And I also wanted brevity because I knew it's going to be 75 minutes in length. That's all I was allowed. I knew I was going to be adding songs. So I was drawn to those stories that were 3 to 4 to 5 pages long. I still read them all. Some were 15 pages, some were 20 pages. It's a great read. It's a great undertaking. So I highly recommend it if you have nothing else to do for a month. What I ended up doing was selecting 3 stories: The Golden Goose, The 3 Huntsmen, and The 4 Skillful Brothers. The Golden Goose, obviously, there I have my goose looking for a magical creature. The 3 Huntsmen had a talking lion. 4 Skillful Brothers had a malevolent dragon, and they all had royalty. Then at the very end of the book, I found a 4th story, and it's not so much a story as a paragraph, and it's called The Golden Key. And what it does is it talks about a boy in the woods on a winter day collecting firewood. And he gets cold and thinks he wants to start a fire before he goes home. So he goes looking for something to spark the fire, and he finds a golden key. And he thinks, bright lad that he is, if there's a key, there must be a box or a trunk or something. So he starts scratching around in the snow, and he finds this box, and he inserts the key. And the final sentence really is just him getting ready to unlock that box and awaiting all the wonderful things that are going to come out of it. And I thought, well, this doesn't feel like an epilogue. This feels like a prologue. In fact, this feels like these 3 stories that I want to tell could be what come out of this box. So what I did was I created a farm boy lost in the woods, finds the key, finds the trunk, opens the trunk, and a troupe of players spring out. They have been imprisoned there by a evil witch. And now that the spell has been broken, to show their appreciation, they are going to perform these 3 stories that I have selected. I put the first draft together. I wrote the score. Again, this was an eclectic score. There was a blues number, a bossa nova number, a 50s doo-wop song. And my producer, after the reading, said, we're going to do it. But here's something you might want to think about. Each of these stories has a lesson. In the first one, the lesson seems to be generosity. In the last one, it seems to be hard work. The middle one seems to be loyalty. So what if your young man coming into this is not generous, is loyal to nobody and nothing, and is lazy? So that he can learn something from each of these stories and emerge from this episode in the woods with these players, hopefully a changed human being. That made all kinds of dramatic sense to me. And so that's what we did. And again, this assignment, it was so great to take this on, to work with these young actors at the theater school. And I just had a great time doing it. I want to move on to one more musical, Scrooge and the Ghostly Spirits. Okay, this piece, based on A Christmas Carol, of course, by Charles Dickens, originally written in 1843, produced here in town at the Citadel Theater out in Lake Forest, 2017. So this is just 6 years ago. I mentioned Frank Farrell earlier, the actor manager of the Free Shakespeare Company. Frank and I ended up working a lot together between 1983 and this date. And a few years before 2017, Frank had played Scrooge in a straight version, meaning a non-musical version of A Christmas Carol out at the Citadel Theater. And Scott wanted him to play Scrooge again. And Frank said, well, if I'm going to do it, I want it to be a musical and maybe a sung through musical. And I want Doug to write the music and lyrics and create the book, meaning the structure under which all of this is going to happen. So Frank and I got together and talked about it. We met with Scott, and Scott knew that if this was going to happen, it was going to have to be a commission. So he asked me, how much is this going to cost me? I gave him a number. He didn't blink. We all shook hands and we went away and nothing happened. So I thought, well, it was fun to meet him. I'm happy to see his facility, which is great. Maybe someday. Out of the blue, several years later, a phone call comes and it's Scott saying, are you still interested in writing a sung through musical of A Christmas Carol? And I said, yes. And he said, we would like to commission you to do that. So I agreed, and the contract was being prepared. And I realized, oh my gosh, I've only seen A Christmas Carol up on stage 3 times now at the Goodman in different facilities with different directors and different actors playing the central role. I've seen film versions of this, I've seen television versions of it, but I've never read the source material. So I better do that before I sign on to anything. So I read A Christmas Carol, which is a beautiful little novella. And it just sort of occurred to me, maybe this work already exists in its most perfect form. What do I have to bring to it? Should I really be doing this? And I had sort of decided by the end of the day that I was going to say no. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to say no to someone who had already offered me something that I had said yes to. What happened was, there is a phrase, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, comes from Jacob Marley, mankind is my business. That stayed with me. And by the end of that day, I found that I had composed a song in my head. All the music was there and most of the lyrics were there to this idea of mankind being my business. And so I was listening to my gut and I thought, I better say yes, because if more songs start coming to me, I'm going to feel like an idiot. So I did say yes. I sat down with Scott. I said, can I write a musical with a book, or does it have to be a show that is sung through? He said, a book musical is fine. How many actors can I have? He said 15 to 18, including children. This is great because this is a very large palette. I usually don't get to work on a canvas of this size. How many musicians? He said 3. Can it be 90 minutes in length? He said perhaps. The reason I felt 90 minutes in length without an intermission is because in the reading of the novella, I thought there's one rising line of tension to this piece. An intermission is going to destroy that. I want to be with Scrooge on his dark night of the soul until it's over, and I don't want to take a break. The only thing my producer said is that he did hear strings in the accompaniment, and that turned out to be very helpful to me. So this score, unlike some of my rock scores or eclectic scores, was all of a piece and felt very 19th century to me, or rather a sort of 21st century idea of 19th century music. And I also had to fool myself into thinking that no one had ever put this story up on stage before. Because if I started thinking about all the other adaptations I had seen, being overly influenced by them, I knew it was going to not help me get where I needed to go. It was very helpful to be writing for Frank Farrell. He's a very specific actor and a specific singer. So that was terrific. And Frank did a great job as our Scrooge. I do want to say 3 out of the 4 musicals I just mentioned, Scrooge and The Kingdom of Grimm and The Wind in the Willows, are all published. They now have original cast recordings. This next work I'm going to reference is also published, but it is not a musical. Howard's End. This is a play based on the book by E.M. Forster, first published in 1910, and my version first produced here by the Remy Bumpo Theater Company at Theater Wit in 2019. My connection with this company is that I just like them very much, and I went to go see a number of their shows, and I would always stop, especially when Nick Sands, who was their producing artistic director, was directing something, and just say to him, hey, that was terrific, or I'd send him a note. Finally, I think after the third such encounter, I just sent him an email and I said, look, we should work together on something. And he said, you know what, we should. So we got together for lunch. He mentioned a number of books. I said, the books you're talking about are not in the public domain, are they? He said, no. I said, okay, look, let's talk about something that is in the public domain, because if it's not, I have to find out who has the rights. That's going to take some time. Also, I'm just thinking financially here, I'm going to have to split my royalties with somebody. And you know, this will come as no surprise. There's not a lot of money to be made in writing for the theater. In fact, John Patrick Shanley was once asked, why do you write for the theater? And he said, it's the one place where the money isn't. So whatever money was not going to be there, I did not want to split with another party. So Nick names these 5 books, and I read them all. The Beautiful and the Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Ambassadors by Henry James, Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather, and Main Street by Sinclair Lewis, and then Howard's End by E.M. Forster. The first 4 are all by American authors, and for one reason or another, I thought, you know, this one feels cinematic to me. This one I'm not really connecting to. I don't know how audiences would respond to the characters in this one. This one is huge. I would probably have to pick a chapter or 2 or 3 if I was going to do anything. The one that really spoke to me was Howard's End by Mr. Forster. While Nick and I were speaking, I kept waiting for the C word. You may wonder, what is the C word, Doug? Commission. Are they actually going to pay me to write this thing? And they were. The thing that I connected to in Howard's End is that this is a story, and it's a great one. It has fantastic characters. It has terrific dialogue that seem not to me writerly, but words that a human being might actually say to another human being. It's filled with humor. It's filled with ideas. And in winnowing the thing down and thinking about it, I found a way to tell it with 9 characters. 5 of them were going to be women and 4 would be men. And I always say this to my playwriting students, anytime you can write a part for a woman, please do, because I am telling you, there are more great actresses in the world than there are great actors. So that gave me great joy. I discovered that the book is in the public domain in the States, but not in the UK. And then I went into the book with a great deal of research and started to try to figure out what are the events that are going to put this play into motion and be at the middle and at the end. And about 90 pages in, I found a funeral. And I said, I think that funeral or the aftermath of that funeral should be my starting place. I have to figure out how to get everything that's happened before that somehow into the play, but that feels like a great event to start a play with. Towards the middle, I found a wedding, and I thought, well, this is probably going to be the ending of my first act. And then at the very end of the play, there is what is essentially a birth. So those 3 events seemed really good posts on which to hang the rest of the structure of my play. When I talk about an event, my playwriting students know this. It's like if they're starting in on a play, I always say it's good to think about, why is this play happening now? Or if you want to paraphrase the Passover prayer, what is different about this night from every other night? So with all of the works I've mentioned, there is something different about this night that puts the play into motion. For Howard's End, it was the funeral and the aftermath of the funeral. Again, figuring out what characters I could do without, figuring out where I could take liberties with the text, and also how to deal with the episodic nature of the story, which takes place in 10 locations all across England. There is a phrase that Forster uses in this book that really spoke to me, and he talks about the architecture of hurry Because again, not unlike the wind in the willows, this is the time that the motor car is coming into the lives of the men and women of this country. And it is changing the city, it is changing the country, and you're going to have to change with it or you're going to be run over. This whole idea of the architecture of hurry helped me because I knew we would be moving very fast between all of the locales in the story. Oh, by the way, Howard's End, produced at Remy Bumpo, was it was a beautiful production, and it was nominated for 5 Jeff Awards, including one for Best Direction and Best New Work. So again, it is a project that I'm very glad I said yes to. Shaw versus Tunney. This is the piece that's coming up. And it is based on J.R. Tunney's book, The Prize Fighter and the Playwright, which was published in 2010. Here I'm using the past tense, first produced by Grippo Stage Company at Theater Wit. But actually, as I said, we start previews on Thursday and we open a week from Tuesday. So this work has not exactly withstood the test of time. What happened was that Jay Tunney spent 10 years writing this book about his father because the book concerns his dad, Gene Tunney, world heavyweight boxing champion, and his father's almost implausible friendship with the great Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. Jay has written a very fine book and was thinking about trying to turn it into a play himself. He took a playwriting class with me, and after a couple of sessions, he decided maybe somebody else should be doing this who has actually studied up on how to write a play. So we went out to lunch. He asked me if I would read his book. I knew a lot of plays by Shaw. I just had finished reading a biography of Shaw previously. And this was a case where I'm glad I said yes instead of no, or let me think about it, because I took that book home and by page 2, I was hooked. I thought this is a wonderful book. And it was also very unusual because in this case, the author of the book commissioned me to write a stage adaptation when it is usually the other way around. The playwright or the dramatist will go looking for the underlying rights as I did with Brave New World, but here we are reversed. One of the things that was very interesting about the book was the search for the event that everything could spin in and around. And I was reading the book and my wife was saying, how's it going? And I'm saying, it's a great book, but I'm not exactly sure where the event is. She's someone who always reads the end of the book first. So she starts leafing through the end of the book and she says, I found it. And I said, please don't tell me because I haven't gotten there yet. I finally do get to it and it's tremendous. It is absolutely the center of a story. It is that moment that everything can lean towards it and everything can lead away from it. Within that book, there were wonderful themes because the book is about boxing, it's about books, it's about friendship and love and marriage and faith. It's about the nature and purpose of God. I should have that with a capital G, by the way, and the nature and purpose of prayer, which are almost, when you talk about God and prayer, these are almost third rails of the American theater. Almost nobody writes plays about these subjects, but I'm convinced that we're all interested in these subjects. Without this becoming a come to Jesus play, it is very much a spiritual piece, and it's about the spiritual journey that Shaw and Tunney's wife, Paulie Lauder Tunney, took. It was interesting too, because when I was talking to my agent about this particular book, he said, how many people is it going to take to stage it? I said, I think it'll be 7. And he said, so obviously you're not thinking about New York. I said, okay, if I was thinking about New York, how many actors should be in the play? He said 3, maybe 4. So I thought, I've never written a play for 3 actors. Let me try doing that. And this was a great assignment to myself. I'm glad I took it on. I found the dramatic structure to allow for the beginning and the middle and the end. The play has almost a prologue and an epilogue, with most of it taking place on a Greek island in the Adriatic. And it required, I will tell you, intense research, reading some 20 books by and about Shaw and by and about Tunney, as well as a really great book on boxing by Joyce Carol Oates. And again, Nick Sands, who I work with on Howard's End, is directing the piece. We are in the thick of it, believe me. So I'm sort of happy to have this day away, not thinking about where we are with the show, just to come and talk to you about this and some other pieces. I just want to mention very fast now this whole idea of public domain. In the States, copyright lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years, but this may not apply to texts published or registered before 1928. One may need the assistance of a copyright attorney. And copyright attorneys are expensive people. So you may want to consider, as I did, for Brave New World, contacting a lawyer who's involved in the creative arts, Lawyers for the Creative Arts. They're a great organization and they may be helpful to you if that is of interest to you. Copyright laws vary from country to country. Wikipedia offers a list of countries' copyright lengths. I think that's the actual title, A List of Countries' Copyright Lengths. And if you go there, it's everything from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. So that's very helpful. I would not go strictly off of Wikipedia. I would still do your own research. Obviously, many benefits are to be found in adapting something in the public domain. I've already talked about that. And also, many texts come into the public domain on the first day of every year. So it's worth paying attention to what those texts are. I was thinking as I got to the end of this, somebody a little more organized than me might actually have a summoning up of what he has said. So this is my attempt to be that person. Whenever possible, say yes. If you're going to say no, think about why and be prepared to change your mind. Always make sure that you have the stage rights to the text you are adapting or that the text is in the public domain. It is sometimes helpful to have some precepts in mind before you embark on your investigation into the text. However, you should be willing to ignore those precepts if you find a more interesting path to follow. Look for the events. Where can the play start? Where can it go? Where can it finish? What is at its center? Are the characters compelling? Is their dialogue actable or does it sound writerly? Is there a great story to be told and will it work on stage? What's happening thematically that you yourself connect to? How will the structure of the text have to be altered to make for compelling theater? And finally, I say this about art and about life. What do you need to tell your story versus what do you want? So here, I'm going to pause. I'm going to turn it over to Conway, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you so much, Doug. You'll see that folks are clapping. We've got some questions in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started in on these questions. The first one comes from Sandra Jackson Opoko. The question, I'm revising a play with music, the theatrical adaptation of a chapter from my own novel in progress. Any advice on self-adaptation? I'd also appreciate suggestions on finding someone to set my original lyrics to music.
Right. So, well, the first thing I would say is make sure you finish the one before you start in on the other. So I would think it's a good idea to finish the book if that's what you're working on. Get some reactions to that book, even if it's not going to be published, before you try to dramatize it. It is difficult, but not impossible, to find a composer for something that you're already working on. What composers for the theater are generally looking for is collaborators. So more often than not, they're going to sit down with a book writer or a book writer and a lyricist that they connect to, and they're going to bounce ideas off of each other until they find something that they both think would make for an exciting evening of theater. I actually have talked to a few playwrights who I think are doing what you're doing. They're searching for composers to write music for something they've already decided that they want to write. And I can tell you that it's very tough going. It doesn't mean it's not impossible. It's just hard.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you for that question, Sandra. Jessica Puller asks, how have you ever received a commission with the conditions that wouldn't work for your vision of a script? For example, they wouldn't give you enough actors or musicians. They said no to it being a musical or skipping the intermission, or the theater said they wouldn't give you the rights, but they said they would give you the rights, but didn't. How have you handled that kind of situation?
Right. Well, it's a great question. The theater are not the people who usually obtain the rights. That because if I'm going to take something on, I'm going to have to go out and get the rights for myself. Um, I think the answer is I don't know that I've ever encountered that situation, because one of the things I really like about commissions um, is that it forces me to use different muscles than I would ordinarily use. And so I'm always trying to take the wants and needs of my benefactor into account and trying to figure out where the thing I want to do might match the thing that they want to do. Um, but somebody might say, look, what I want is a play that's an hour first act, a 45-minute second act. The toughest assignment I ever had in this, I will just tell you, is a British actor named Simon Slater, who is a wonderful performer and a good friend of mine. But he wanted me to write a one-man show that would allow him to show off his abilities as an actor, as a singer, as a musician, and as a magician. And I thought, he's such a talented guy. I really want to try to take this on. And what I came up with was a one-man thriller, which I thought, I don't know that this has ever been done. And what's more, maybe I want to find out why that is. He is just fantastic in this piece, and I'm so glad I wrote it. We've had great luck performing it in London and the UK, Vienna, and Canada, here in Chicago. And I will say, at the risk of committing the sin of pride, I have now received 8 commissions to write for the theater, and all of them have been produced, either by my benefactor or with the assistance of my benefactor, because like Simon himself is not a producer, so we had to go out and find a director and a producer for the show. So I guess I've never hit that wall, but I'm sure it's to come.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Jessica. Catherine says, thank you for this fascinating talk. I appreciate your emphasis on the power of saying yes. That being said, could you tell us about an adaptation you explored doing and then decided not to, and why not?
I think the nearest thing I can think of are those 4 books that Nick Sands asked me to read, 5 books, when we had lunch. And I really thought long and hard about each and every one of those in terms of how they might work on the stage. Nick likes to say that, he gave me the assignment, and a month later I came back with 5 book reports. I think if someone had said, you must pick something other than Howard's End, I probably would have gone with F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Beautiful and the Damned. But it is a play about people who are beautiful and damned. And beyond that, I didn't know I didn't know what it was that the audience was going to connect to. I think I could have done it, but I'm not sure that I would be the best person to do it. So I suppose that I must have picked up some books over the years thinking, oh, I could probably do something with this. And then at some point decided no, or it just didn't stay with me. And it's also, I think it's really important to think about this idea of, does the book or the article or whatever it is, does it already exist in its most perfect form? I think Vladimir Nabokov's Pale Fire is an incredible book, but I think it would be foolhardy to try to put that on stage. And I'm sure that even if, as I'm saying this, I'm sure somebody is making a musical out of it. But I think it's important to really look at the material and say, is this crying out for a theatrical experience?
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for your question, Catherine. Steve Nelson asks, my question is about how to best adapt a novel's interiority, the character's internal dialogue and thoughts for the stage. How can you determine if it's best to use soliloquies or put this in conversations? And they add, thank you.
Yeah, really good question, because obviously, Hamlet contains 5 soliloquies that are all interior monologues, aren't they? They're the moments where he comes down to the footlights and is telling us the things that he can't tell anybody else. I think you have to be careful with this, because a little direct address goes a long way. And I don't think we fundamentally go to the theater to be talked at. Now, I think a one-man show or a one-woman show is different. But I think if you're going to create monologues that explore the interior thoughts and the interior feelings, you want to be very selective. It is also a great way. I discovered this with Howard's End, because while that was being developed, I remember my benefactor was trying to get a little bit more of E.M. Forster into the book, which I think was a nice way of saying a little less Doug Post. So I did create 6 interior monologues for the characters. There were 4 from one of the Schlegel sisters. And then I suddenly found the other Schlegel sister saying, well, wait a minute, I want to say something. And then I had one of the men in the show. I could just see him going, you know, why do these women get to talk all the time? I have something I want to say. And I did write them and we did rehearse them. And 3 weeks into rehearsal, I just said, we have to cut them all because they're really slowing the thing down. My director talked me into one, which I saved. And I said, well, look, if we're going to do that one, I also want the one at the end, because we've now got one near the start. I think we need this one to for the structure to have it also at the end. But I think a little bit of direct address and a little bit of pulling directly from the narrative goes a long way. The other way, of course, to do it is the story theater technique that I mentioned, where you actually have actors narrating their own lives.
Thank you, Doug. Sue Smith says, my play is based on the autobiographies of 2 now deceased people. To be granted permission to use, do I need to send their estates the play to get their permission or approval? If a theater is interested in my play, does that give me any leverage in getting the rights?
Potentially. I am a card-carrying member of the Dramatists Guild. And Conway, I hope this is okay to say, and it doesn't sound like I'm, you know, proselytizing too much, but I do think it's worthwhile for anyone who is interested in writing for the theater to at least investigate becoming a member of the Guild, because they have all sorts of articles that they will allow you to have access to on how to write about the real people in your play. And so they can tell you things that I cannot, because they're attorneys and they've studied up on this. Having said all that, it's really important to remember that, you know, anybody can sue anyone for anything. So you can take all the precautions you want and still have somebody come after you. I think you want to enter something like this with caution. And again, I'm not an attorney and I don't want to offer any legal advice, but you may want to consult someone who can offer you some legal advice in terms of the best way to proceed.
I'm just going to jump into another maybe similar question. It seems like, again, you might give a similar answer, but I'm going to read from Ray Leslie. What's a fair deal with a rights holder of a famous deceased writer / poet? If the poet was alive, I would expect a normal 50-50 split. When she was alive, I had her support. I've been working on the project for many years. It's a finished musical, 18 art songs, and successful reading in NYC 6 months ago.
Well, alive or dead, I think you're probably looking at a 50-50 split. You might be able to bargain down from there, but you know, this is the thing, it's so tough. I remember a fellow playwright at Victory Gardens opening night of a work that she had adapted. This is a living author now. And it had gone really well. And I thought she'd done a great job. And she was kind of sulking in the corner. And I said, why so sad? And she said, because half of everything I make is now going to go to this other party. You can try to negotiate that. And I don't want to, again, I don't want to tell you what you might want to do. I do know that the Guild is great about this sort of thing in terms of standards for the industry. So you might be able to shake that up a little to a 40-60 or a 30-70. You can try.
I would
They can
take
always say
anything.
no.
Worked so hard on it, I would take anything.
Mm.
I'm sure you understand. Doug, I hope you read my, sent you a private message.
Yeah, I haven't opened any of the chats because
Oh, okay.
that's for me, that kind of feels like passing notes back and forth.
No, I just didn't want to mention
So
it.
I'm just trying to pay attention to all of your smiling faces.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Doug. I actually think that with the time left, Doug, I would love if you could maybe take a few moments to share. Seems like some of the folks in the room are familiar with you and your work, either as attendees, viewers of your work, or as students. And in the opening slides of the presentation, we were sharing about our summer courses that are upcoming. And Doug is teaching a course as well as teaches a series of courses with the Graham School throughout the year. So Doug, do you mind just closing us out with letting folks know how we can actually stay engaged with your coursework, but then also about the upcoming show?
Sure. So one of the things I'm so grateful to the Graham School for allowing me to do is not only teach playwriting, but theater appreciation. So I do that, and I know a number of you probably, I see some familiar faces, have studied various theater appreciation courses with me. The playwriting courses, we have set up a track so that in the fall, I teach Introduction to Playwriting. In the winter, I teach writing the 10-minute play. In the spring, I teach writing the one-act play. And then in the summer, I teach developing a play in progress. That's coming up, I believe, on Thursday, June 15th. Does that sound right, Conway? And so there is this path you can get on with the first class, I'm giving out some assignments. And then for the other three, you're creating assignments for yourself, which then are sent to me. I bring them into the room. We do everything in the room. We read it aloud. We take on, parts. We talk in what is hopefully a constructive manner, asking questions of the play. And so it is a place to develop whatever it is you might be working on, be it a 10-minute play or a series of 10-minute plays, a one act or a full length. Any and all are welcome. I try to cast as wide a net as possible because I don't want to exclude anyone. And I do find that I have some repeat customers, I will say, who are with me for a while, and then they're saying, yeah, I've already taken Introduction to Playwriting. I'm going to sit out the fall, but I'll be back with you in the winter. And sure enough, they seem to come back. So I'm very grateful that I've got this this map to follow, and it's just been a grand time. Shaw versus Tunney, I guess I can just mention briefly. Again, that is being produced by Grippo Stage Company at Theater Wit under the expert direction of Nick Sands. It stars Richard Hensel as George Bernard Shaw, Sam Pearson as Jean Tunney, and Maddie Sachs as Polly Lauder Tunney. Maddie and I have done 3 or 4 shows together. Richard I've known for almost 40 years. Sam and I have never worked together, and my gosh, what a find. I am so happy that he walked into our lives. Nick, those 3 guys. Oh, and we're actually getting some really great advanced press. There was a story that came out yesterday in the Chicago Tribune. There's a story that came out today in the Chicago Sun-Times. New City gave us a 6-page spread. This is all wonderful because I'm sure you all know this, there are not that many feature articles coming out right now on what's happening on our theater scene. So there seems to be some interest in what we're doing, and we would love for you all to come and be in our audience.
Doug, thank you so much for such a rich conversation, an engaging Q&A component this afternoon. Thank you all who have joined us. Again, we will be sending off the recording and hope that you will continue to join us for future Writer Studio and Graham School endeavors. With that, we will say goodbye and thank you once again to Doug. If you can please add your gratitude in the chat as we close out today's time, that would be appreciated. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
See you, everyone.